I just want to mention one thing before we go into prayer. I subscribe to a couple of conservative poll-taking groups, and one of them is Barna. I don't know if you know them or not, but they released something on Tuesday this week, which, well, I'll ask you, do you know who the fastest growing population in the churches is? Do you know what it is?
Young people.
Under 30. The under 30 are actually outnumbering us. We're known as the elders on this particular survey, but under 30, they're attending church more often than even the people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Good to hear.
Yeah, and then on Wednesday, what happened? The person I feel was very responsible for getting him back into church was assassinated. That was a tough week. But we got to remember the Kirk family and what they're going through. Any other prayer requests?
Does anyone have updates on Dean?
I was just going to say that.
Anyone?
Woody was our main connection on that one. Woody was our main connection on that one.
So we haven't received an email from Anchor, right, or anything. I hadn't seen anything that I looked.
I know they said she still has pressure in the back of her brain that's causing double vision and a few other things, and that they think there will be some permanent damage. They still don't know that just how much.
So is she awake? Do we know?
She's awake.
She's awake.
And she talks some. We had her on the side of the bed the other day. But I don't know if she's able to walk. Well, I did see her on the side of the bed, but I didn't know whether they picked her up and walk her or not.
Any others?
Pray for the administration of Clemson University.
Clemson?
They have not, they've suspended that professor, but there was a poll of there's almost 900 people that have been fired for things that they've posted on social media in regards to the assassination, and Clemson University has not done that yet. They've suspended the professor. The professor has his whatever job is very ridiculous too, because I've looked it up. He did not teach nursing, I'll tell you that. But it's just ridiculous of what his position is. And yes, freedom of speech is all fair, but you don't, even as a Christian, as a conservative Christian, I would never say the things that people have said on social media.
Vulgar things.
Just vulgar and just heartbreaking things.
Why would you agree with anybody that assassinated somebody?
Right. Even if it's somebody I didn't like. I mean, even if I didn't like the person that was assassinated, that's still...
We can go all the way back to John Wilkes Booth and name assassins in this country, and
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really likes them at all.
No.
One of the things that we can hold on to is, and one of the news personalities said it, if you look around, so a young conservative voice was taken down by an assassin's bullet. He said, look around. Cities aren't burning.
Mm-hmm.
No riots.
Right.
No protests. No looting. And I think that's quite a statement for...
And in place of that, you see prayer.
Prayer vigils, yeah.
All over the world.
People are getting saved for this.
Yeah.
They're getting saved left and right for this. So that's good.
Charlie would be proud of the conservative movement, especially on campus right now. Others? Quiet this morning.
My mother-in-law, her name's Debbie, she's battling bronchitis, and just prayers for her that she gets better soon.
All right, let's open a little bit of prayer then. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your patience with us, Lord. We thank you that we're able to come here on Sunday morning and worship you. I pray that whatever we learn this morning will be carried throughout the week and maybe be a better example of what a conservative can be. I ask you, Lord, to please be with Brian and Susie as they're traveling quite a bit. I want to see Susie's mother eventually, and that's a trip in itself. Be with Dee. We don't know what her exact situation is right now. We know she's not home, so I think we hear about that. Please be with her. The Clemson administration and the other colleges around here that aren't condemning some of what their staff and professors are saying in emails especially. I guess you could think that, but why put it in words? I put it out there so other people can fire you. To Debbie, who's suffering with bronchitis, Lord, that you'd help her. That you bless the pastor as he brings a message this morning, Lord. That maybe we can all learn something out of this class this morning. I do ask this all in my son's precious name. Amen. I'll give you a little bit, you'll learn a lot about our family this morning, my testimony. But I got to give you a little background. Rose and I were both saved, my wife Rose and I were both saved in the early 80s. We've been around a while. I was ordained a deacon in the Southern Baptist Church in 1988. And I began teaching in 1985, mostly children, but for the last almost 30 years, well actually I should say until 2015, I've taught adults, young adults, old adults, all sorts of ages. But in 2015 I lost my voice because of cancer in my throat and I couldn't teach anymore. I went without speaking for months at a time, so something that the Lord blessed me with, quite honestly. How many of you here were saved as adults? Raise your hand. Not as children, but as adults. Have a traumatic experience as an adult leading to your salvation. I think of somebody in the Bible who had a very traumatic experience in their salvation in the New Testament.
The Apostle Paul.
Saul. Or Saul. That's it. On the road to Damascus. If Christ jumped out in front of you, you Saul also. What was Paul's position at that time? What was he doing?
Pharisee.
He was a Pharisee.
Killing Christians.
Yeah, well, what he was doing was dragging them back to the church in Jerusalem, and then the leaders in the Jewish Jerusalem church would vote on these people whether they were saved or not, or whether they would accept Christ. If they did, what happened to them?
They were killed.
What happened to Stephen?
Still is.
He was stoned for his beliefs. Who was there? Saul was there. You witnessed that. That's all in Acts. Mark 3:6 tells us what was going on. If you want to open the Bible. 3:6. Jesus had just healed a man. When did he do it? Was it, on the Sabbath. And that was against the rules of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You couldn't work at all on Sunday, even performing miracles. Verse 6 says, Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. And this is all Paul's upbringing. Paul was taken as a young child and educated in the ways of the Pharisees. Him turning his life around was completely traumatic for him and for everyone else who knew him. I don't claim to compare myself to Paul or Saul at all, just the name only. You think Paul may have second guessed his occupation before he met Jesus? You think on the road before he got to Damascus that he was thinking about what he had done? No, you don't think so? Did you ever wonder why God presented you with a particular situation in your life, saved or unsaved? Unsaved, He may have presented you with something that would have changed your life around. You would have looked differently. I experienced several things like that in my younger years before I was saved. And I'll talk about them in a minute. I don't know about Paul. Paul was a very learned individual. He was not only a Jew, but a Roman citizen, so he was able to walk around all over the Roman Empire. But what he thought about what he was doing, I don't know. I'd like to tell you about some of my experiences with the Lord prior to my salvation. See, I think the Lord was working on me for a good 10 years before I was saved. And I challenge you today, you were saved as an adult, maybe you can look back on your life before your salvation and see where you either turned the Lord down, or turned away from Him, or just didn't want to go that route. I was raised in a very strict Catholic home, a lot like Brian, as a matter of fact. And I did all the things that children did. Went to church on Sunday, attended catechism classes, went to church-sponsored youth groups. I was even very friendly with the Catholic priest. But I had a real problem with some of their rules and regulations. One of them that really troubled me was the way they ask you to look, present your issues to others, what they call saints. To me, that breaks the first commandment. You're putting somebody else in God's position. You know, the Catholics ask you to pray to Mary or to Joseph or to Peter or you're putting people in ahead of God. They claim that, when I was a kid, they would say, well, God's so busy saving the world that you ought to pray to some of these saints to help you out, just so that you can, recognize that there are other Catholics in this world. It didn't work for me. It was a real problem I had. But eventually I graduated from high school and all that church stuff went to the wayside. I even attended a Jewish college. I went to Fairleigh Dickinson University, which when I went there 50-odd years ago, 60-odd years ago, it was a Jewish college. But because I lived in the area, I could just commute. That's the reason I went there. I didn't do so well in college. When I was 21, I dropped a 4-credit physics course and became a part-time student. Anybody remember what happened to part-time students in 1968?
You got drafted.
I was going to get drafted, yes. You had a choice back then, coming out of high school. You either went to college or you went to the military. I mean, that was the choices we had if you were able-bodied. I didn't get drafted. I knew I was going to get drafted, so I enlisted. Made my service 3 years instead of 2, but I could choose what I wanted to do at that point. And I chose to go into military intelligence, which I figured might get me a desk job someplace, and not be in the thick of things. I knew I was going to wind up in Vietnam anyway. My orders out of my training had me going to a northern province in Vietnam. Yeah, everybody flew into Tan Son Nhut Air Base, which was outside Saigon, and they bused you or traveled throughout the country. And the orders I had me going to I Corps, which was all the way up north, and which was more where the fighting was than anything else. But the Lord was looking after me, although I was not saved yet. But when I got to Saigon, my orders got changed. I got sent to a military intelligence unit in Saigon. There were 3 military units there, and I got sent to one of those. Although I never did any military intelligence work, I wound up in a security platoon, working 6 hours a night guarding the guard towers. During the day, we had civilian guards, Vietnamese guards, but at night, we had GIs in the guard towers. I didn't like working nights. I never have. I like to be in bed between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. I can't handle anything else. But so I went to work in our company headquarters. It's a very large military unit, and there was probably about 10 or 12 people right in the admin section of our military unit, which was a lot. But we also ran buses to the 3 intelligence centers downtown Saigon with all the personnel that was on our compound. And so I had to learn to drive a bus. That was one of my duties, not only that, but being a courier. When I left the country to go to Vietnam, we had approximately 50 graduates in my training unit. 45 of us went to Vietnam. The other 5 went to Europe. And I didn't really see many of them while I was in Vietnam, but I did catch up with several of them on my way back out of the country. Of the 45 of us that left or came back at the same time, one of us didn't make it. The one who got my orders to go to Agwork in Pleiku, he got my orders to go up there, and he never made it home. Was the Lord looking out for me then? Could I have turned to him then? I didn't. Not then. I had to be hit over the head with something to turn to the Lord. My life went on pretty easy from there, pretty routine. Rose and I got married. We got engaged in December of '68 before I went to Vietnam. We got married in September of '70. In fact, our anniversary is this week, 55 years. But when I came back from Vietnam, I still had 18 months left in the service. I was stationed in Baltimore, Maryland, and that's where I eventually stayed with my wife and soon-to-be family. All of our family was up in New Jersey, but we stayed there. The prospects of a civilian job in Maryland were easier than they were in Jersey. We bought a house. First my daughter was born in '74. My daughter Susan. And then 2 years later, we bought a house in Norfolk County, Maryland. All was going well. Rose is now pregnant with her 2nd child. In November of 1977, our son Daniel was born. However, within hours of his birth, he was transferred from a local hospital to Johns Hopkins Hospital neonatal care unit. We were very fortunate to have this Hopkins Hospital so close to us. I mean, it was 30 miles from where we lived, but it was only about 5 miles from where the hospital was that he was born. Was God involved in this? Who knows? My son was born with multiple birth defects. His esophagus was attached to his trachea. He had a hole in his heart. No anal opening at all. Muscle deformity in his right hand, left hand.
Don't remember.
They had a name for it. It's called the Batter syndrome, and 4 out of the 5 things that he had, those 4 out of the 5. The only thing that he didn't have is that he was a full 9-month baby. He wasn't premature. So, but I left the hospital. I left my wife at the hospital where we delivered, and I went directly to Johns Hopkins. I met with the chief pediatric surgeon at that time, About 5 o'clock that night, they decided that they were gonna operate on him the very next day. I mean, here we are, a baby that's 1 day old, and they were gonna work on him. All went as what could be expected, but the road was very long with no guarantees. The doctors really hadn't experienced someone with all of his issues, and they had no idea how long he was gonna live, if he was gonna make it, 24, 48 hours. My son and my wife spent a lot of their time in the hospital the first year. My son didn't come home for almost 3 months after he was born, and even that was a short trip. Shortly after that, I'm trying to wake up. I realized I needed some help. I had my son being taken care of by my wife and the greatest doctors, pediatric doctors that we could find at Hopkins. I needed something more solid than that, something more spiritual. We were told that if my son could get to the age of 7, that he could probably live a while with those defects that he had. His intestines or his GI tract was always messed up, even for a long time. At the same time that all this was happening to us, we lived in a small community of 40 homes. They're all townhouses. The local drunk, he was an engineer for the gas company. He got saved. He would come to all of the functions prior to this and be drunk by the time he got there. But he came knocking on my door a lot of times. I'd say at least 3. And I'd throw him out. He'd want to show me in the Bible what I was doing wrong. And eventually he started having a Bible study at his house on Saturday nights. And my wife and I eventually attended this. And very soon after attending these things, I realized that this was what I needed. This was what the Lord was pointing me to. This is the brick that he hit me over the head with. My son had to suffer so that I would be saved, and my wife. Our infant son led us to salvation. I had survived my deployment in Vietnam. I had a local drunk knock on my door to tell me about Jesus. And on top of that, on Sunday afternoon, I turned the TV on to watch a movie. I can't remember what I was going to watch, but Hal Lindsey's movie, Lake Planet Earth, came on. If you haven't seen that one was big back in the 70s. It's all about the end times. And it really got my mind going. In fact, I studied eschatology for several months. I wanted to understand. And then I realized it didn't make any difference. Whatever was going to happen in the future is up to the Lord, not to me. Why did it happen at this time? Just as I needed some reassurance that I was going the right way. I finally realized that Jesus had been calling me for the last 10 years. Ever since I left Vietnam. All I had to do was listen. Didn't do that. We started attending a local church very similar to this. It was run by Bob Jones graduate, just like this one. It was a local independent church. And the pastor of that church was on a mission trip to Brazil at the time that 10 families all joined that church. I mean, we've almost tripled the amount of people attending. And he said he was going to turn around and go back to Brazil September 2nd. That was back in the early 80s when we did all that. Guess what ministry this church was very involved in, that I could get involved in? they had a bus ministry. I had learned to drive a bus in Vietnam. And back then, you didn't need a hazmat license to drive a bus. So for the next 3 years, as soon as we joined this church, for the next 3 years, I was on the bus route every Sunday morning with one of my kids, traveling around picking up mostly young children for church on Sunday. My son was well enough to attend school when he was 5 years old, and although he needed special treatment when he was in school. Once he reached the age of 7, most of his medical issues were under control. The doctors knew that. But this traumatic experience led Rose and I to the Lord. But it didn't stop there. It didn't stop for me. It didn't stop for Paul. Paul of Tarsus now had to convince everybody that he was no longer a Christian slayer. Do you think that was easy? The apostles had a real problem with him, the true apostles, the ones who knew Jesus when he was alive. They had to be seriously convinced that Paul was no longer a Christian slayer. Acts 9:8 says, Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. See, when Jesus met him on the road to Damascus, the light was so bright it blinded Paul. Paul couldn't see. He had to be guided to someone's home, and then eventually he could see it. I don't know how long it took him. It didn't take him days, it may have taken him weeks. But Paul had to completely revamp his mind about what he believed, what he had seen, what his future was going to be like. A traumatic experience from all of us as Christians, if we experience those, can be very life-changing, can be very mind-blowing, if you want to add that. I'm not comparing myself to Paul, but I feel that the traumatic experiences that my wife and I have experienced in the last 40 plus years was mind-blowing. It was difficult. My wife was an excellent nurse for my son. She took care of him day and night. I'm not sure she even slept the first year he was home. I think the only time she slept well was when he was back in the hospital and the nurses were taking care of him. But she survived, and we survived. Acts 9:22. Yet Paul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Christ. Paul grew exponentially in his faith. He understood what he was up against. And I guess none of us really experienced Jesus coming to us. Did our lives suddenly become less complicated? No. We're still as complicated as ever. Especially our midnight rides to Johns Hopkins because our son was in trouble. That must have been 20 or 30 times we did that over the first couple of years. And something else happened that kind of maybe solidified that we were doing the right thing. When Dan was about 3 months old, he actually died in my wife's arms. He stopped breathing totally. I was still working, and I was a good half hour away, so she didn't call me. She called the neighbor of ours, who was a cop. And when he arrived, it was like in January or February. It wasn't a warm month. My wife opened the door to let our friend in, and the Holy Spirit came in, a gust of wind. and put life back into my son. That kind of solidified as to what we were doing. The Lord was verifying His presence in our lives. By the way, this cop was so moved by this that he gave up being a policeman. It was too negative on him, I guess. And he was one of the couples that got saved when we did. But at 30 plus years old, probably 32 years old, he and his wife and his two daughters, they sold everything they had. They moved to Ohio so he could go to Bible school. Eventually becoming a pastor for over 40 years. He earned his doctorate degree, and he lives in Greenville right now, and is suffering with dementia. But he still credits my son for a great deal of his belief in God. Anyone else have anything they'd like to share about this? Their traumatic experiences, perhaps? Don't be so quiet. I haven't allowed you to talk all morning. Come on. Yes?
So I had similar experiences in the Catholic Church. And at that time, you were just referring to as, we were praying to the saints and such. But I never you didn't get exposed. It wasn't open to be exposed to the Word, to what I understand now and have since I was saved at 42. But if I go back, I had a desire. I didn't know about salvation as we know it, as I know it now. But I always had that desire since I was 10 years old, which led me, I thought I was going to be a priest. And I had the schooling to do that, and it didn't go that way, which is, you hindsight it like you're talking about, and you see those steps, and I know a lot of people have different things that trigger you, through the process till you got to that point. But that kind of reminded me of that period, and there's several more that, a lot of people here can get a lot of story.
I could ask you, think about it. Before you accepted the Lord, were there things the Lord was directing you to? Was there events in your life that you didn't see the Lord in, but the Lord was there? I believe you, like I said, He really worked on me for 10 years. And I had to live the experience of having a son that wasn't there all the time, wasn't at home all the time with us. And it wasn't easy. It really wasn't. But this week we celebrate 55 years, so we made it a few years together. Any others? Anybody else? Yes?
I got saved by a priest.
By a priest?
My husband is a recovered alcoholic. I had to leave him so he could stop drinking. He went to rehab, got saved in rehab. Came back, talking about salvation, talking about the teachings of the Catholic Church that were not right. And I would tease him. I would say, "Oh Lord, now he's become Saint Stephen." He says, "Yeah, go ahead, tease me." And he says, "I'm going to pray a Bible believing church into this neighborhood," which was Brooklyn, New York. And once that happens, I'm not going to step a foot in the Catholic Church again. And he says, "And I'm not going to pressure you, but I'm just going to ask you to go to a service with me, just one service. And after that, it's up to you." So as I attended 3 years after that, a man from Connecticut came to our neighborhood to plant a Bible believing church. And his name is Pastor Beckle. He's from Wisconsin. Actually, his wife's family is from Wisconsin. and he's from Pennsylvania. And he planted this church in Connecticut, and now he came to Brooklyn to evangelize the Jews, the Hasidics, and the Jewish. And so I went to the first service, and I was troubled. I was confused.
Sure.
So I made appointments with 3 priests, and they all canceled my appointment when they found out what I wanted to talk about. And so when I would come home, people say, "So how did it go?" I says, "Tastes like rat, and I don't like the smell of it." So I started praying, "Lord, if this is not a faith that you will have me in, show me. I'm willing to change, and show me." So I'm at work. I'm a surgical technologist working labor and delivery. And Father Louis Maynard, who was my childhood priest, is waiting for the elevator. And he goes, "Milani, well, Mom, what are you doing?" I says, "I work here." And he says, "My dad is having an angiogram upstairs, and I'm waiting for him." I says, "Father Louis, I need to talk to you." He says, "Steve, okay?" I says, "Yes, but he's no longer Roman Catholic." He says, "Oh, what is he now?" I says, "He calls himself a sinner saved by grace." He says, "And how's this man?" I says, "Well, it's all I wanted. He's more patient, more kind. He stopped drinking, he stopped smoking. He doesn't cuss anymore. There are things that, like, we usually say, he doesn't do that anymore because he says that's a cuss word, even though God is, the name of God is mentioned. And I couldn't understand that, but anyway. He says, "What's your question?" I said, "Purgatory, you gave me catechism, and you taught it to me. But it's not here."
Yeah.
I have the New Testament in my scrub pocket. And he says, "I don't want to talk about Navidades." I said, "Well, the Pope came up with this question, this comment that really bothered me." He says, "Oh yeah, what was that?" I says, "He's questioning evolution. If that is true, you and I were not made in God's image.
Yeah.
We were not created in God's image." And he says, I have no problem if we came from monkeys." He says, and I went, "Oh." Then I got mad. Then I said, "Wow, okay. Does that mean then that you and I were not created in God's image? Do you mean to say that the book of Genesis never happened? Do you mean to say when you go on the pulpit and read God's word, it's a story that never happened? Is that what you're saying?" He puts his eyes down. And I says, "When I was a little girl, you always told me to look at your eyes when I spoke to you. And now I'm asking you to say, look at my eyes when I'm talking to you." And he just picks up his eyes. He didn't say a word. And I was like, wow. And then he says, and then I said, "You know what? I've been praying for God to show me, but it's as if not he's using you to show me."
Wow.
And right now, if I go on the street and get hit by a car and die, I know exactly where I'm not going, and it's not heaven. So then his eyes widen. They kind of white. There was an expression on his face that I couldn't explain. But he's still quiet. He didn't say anything.
Really?
So I said, "You know what? When my dad was not there, you were always there. Our relationship is not going to change. Now I got to go home and ask my husband, how can I get saved? Because he's been talking about it. And I've been dismissing him
Mhm.
because I didn't know.
I did it too.
And as that day I went home, well, I gave him a hug and a kiss and went about my work again. And when I get off the train, and on my way home, is my pastor's house, the pastor's house, Pastor Beckle. And he's on the stoop sitting down. And he says, Adelsis, where you going? Are you okay? You're not smiling like you usually smiling. And then I says, Pastor Beckle, do you have a minute? He says, come in. And he left it to me.
Praise God.
When I came home and I told Steve what happened, he didn't know me whether to laugh or cry.
I'd like to end with this. It's not easy to get through. On September 13th of last year, a year ago yesterday, my son passed away. He was 46 years old, and everything that the doctors did to him in his early years or early days was failing on him. His kidneys, his liver, his esophagus, all these things were failing on him. He passed away probably 2 weeks after we started coming to the church. We had a celebration of life for him on his birthday last year in a church that we all belonged to for a long time, that he was actually saved in. And we had a church full of people there, not only our friends and relatives, but his friends. At that celebration of life, I said three things. Why I was happy, why I was celebrating. One is that he lived for 47 years. He wasn't supposed to. Or almost 47 years. He wasn't supposed to live that long. Two, he was saved as a teenager in that church, through their youth ministry there. And of course, three, that Rose and I both got saved. We were celebrating those issues. We even had a birthday cake for him that day, along with the 80 or 90 people that showed up. Last Sunday, we sang a hymn written by Horatio Spafford called "It Is Well With My Soul." And if you don't know the backstory to that one, I'm going to tell it to you now. Horatio was a lawyer in Chicago. He was married with 5 children. One of the children died when he was 4 years old. And the family planned a trip to England. Because of work that Horatio was doing, he couldn't leave with his wife. But his wife and 4 children, 4 daughters, went to England. There was a collision at sea between the boat they were on and another boat. The 226 of the 331 passengers perished. The 4 girls all died. The wife made it to England. She sent him a telegram that said, "Arrived alone." But she then knew what happened. Horatio got the next ship he could from New York to England. And as he was passing over this spot where his daughters all perished, he wrote the song. It was tough to get through that hymn last week. But I was reminded of that story that he told, that he lived. He was a great Christian, don't get me wrong. And he knew that God had done it for some reason. He just didn't know why, I guess. Lord, I thank you for your patience with us. I thank you that you've allowed me to present our story here. We ask you to bless our efforts today. Be with Pastor Carl as he brings a message. Be with Brian and Susie as they're traveling still, Lord. We ask you to bless all that are here. And hopefully they will be a stronger Christian in the days to come.